This is The Extra Mile.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Extra Mile. I'm Caleb Spear along with
G5.
the G5, and we're not alone today, obviously. We're joined by Mark Broyles, and we're joined by Ralph Walker. Guys, thank you so much for coming on this show for the weekend.
Thank you for asking us.
Yeah, it's our joy to be with you. You guys had some cold weather. For me, I came from Tampa, Florida, and this is like dead of winter.
Yeah.
Dead of winter.
You should have been here for that polar vortex, man.
Yeah, man.
That was tough.
Knocked us back.
I heard about that from Mark.
Yeah, we got it in San Antonio.
Oh, yeah.
Are you in the suburb? Where are you in San Antonio?
Actually, we live north of San Antonio, work with the church at Bulverde, which is a town about 24 miles north of downtown San Antonio, kind of the very beginning of the hill country.
Okay, gotcha. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Ken and I drove down there a few weeks ago. And how long have you been working at that congregation?
Been there about 5.5 years. Moved there in 2015.
5.5 years. And then Ralph's at the Henderson Church of Christ. And how long have you been there?
Oh, forever. We moved to Tampa. So I worked with Florida College as the public relations and alumni director, and moved there in '94. And in the last part of '94, we started working with the Henderson Boulevard Church part-time. And then in 2013, I resigned from my position at Florida College and went back to full-time preaching, and I've been with the church full-time since then.
Cool.
Wow.
And serve as an elder as well as one of the preachers. One of the elders, and at first one of the preachers, now the only preacher. So
Yeah. That was my home.
that was complex.
Yeah, it was. It was.
And unneeded.
They got the idea. I got the idea.
You're awesome. That's it.
Yeah. That was my home congregation when I was at college. In my
Okay.
days at FC. Good family there. So the last question, I guess, in the introductory, how did you guys, when and how did you start this whole marriage seminar that you do throughout all the country pretty much now? How'd that start?
Actually, my wife and I, Judy, and I started in 2000. The first year we did that, we did it only for the congregation we were a part of. Had about 17 couples attend, but had a lot of interest after that from people at neighboring congregations. And so we started reaching out to some others. The first few were all in Missouri. But it grew to about 50 couples, which is where we like to keep it as a max. And then Ralph and Paula joined us in 2005 for one in Missouri, and then we started moving to multiple locations after that. So we've been doing them for about the last 20 years.
Wow.
Wow. That is great.
Wow.
It just kind of boomed into this thing. Did you expect it to be this big?
No, it really didn't. But we knew that there wasn't anything really like that going on amongst our brethren. And so that was why Judy and I got interested, as well as the fact that marriage is a big deal to me and family, because I came out of a significantly dysfunctional and broken home. And so I wanted to do whatever I could to help young couples and other couples in general be able to get the tools they needed to maintain a strong and healthy relationship with God as well as each other.
That's wonderful.
Oh, great.
Yeah, Mark and I grew up together, and our family was very tied to Mark through high school years when some of that dysfunction was becoming pretty apparent. And so when Mark and Judy asked us, Judy's the kind of organizer of all these things, and Mark's a great administrator of the marriage retreats, and Paula and I think we're brought on because Paula loves speaking to women and feels really comfortable doing that, and I'm the Ayatollah Partiola. I get to do the social stuff and the fun stuff.
There we go. The fun stuff.
The guru of good times. So we've loved being part of it. We've been so thankful that Mark and Judy invited us to be part of that, because it not only allows us to have an outreach we wouldn't have had before, but it also lets us get to spend good quality time together, and that's always a joy to be with Mark.
That is great. I find that everything is usually better in twos, no matter what mission we're conquering. I mean, you look at the Bible, you look at, Paul and Barnabas, and it works better that way. You were saying about, helping couples become more spiritual, and that's kind of the first question we want to jump in with. How can a marriage grow spiritually? How do you balance, or how do you engage in praying and Bible study together and grow in that.
Yeah, you come to the retreats.
Yeah, that's right.
Retreats.
And that's it. You all have a good time. That's it.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
But you know, I mean, you say that it kind of in jest, but we do tell couples it becomes very important. We read about a lot of different things, hobbies and interests, and those kinds of things. But it's you don't find many couples reading a lot on marriage, and there's a lot of material out there that is not very good. But there's a lot of it that is Bible based and has some very good advice. And so we do encourage couples to read, to come to retreats, to take that kind of opportunity to really share together. And I would say it's probably some of the books that we have read that would give us some of our best ideas in trying to help couples reach that spiritual level.
Yeah, yeah. I think our backgrounds are really different. As Mark has said, he came from a dysfunctional family. Parents weren't Christians until his mother late in life. Mark became a Christian, then his younger brother and his sister, and then his mother. And I came from, I think, a really solid, functional Christian family. And Mark saw that, and I think it made a big difference for him. But I grew up in it, so I didn't really think about how important that is until I got out in the real world and saw how many Christian families are struggling.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're struggling in some cases. They don't even know why they are. But I think that it's a lack of focusing on the spiritual things that creates those marriages that aren't as satisfying. It's this belief, you know, we love each other, we love God, everything's going to be good. And I don't think it happens quite that way.
Mm-hmm. Are you, this may be a dumb question, it's off the fly, are you optimistic about the future couples and future marriages?
You know, it's funny. It's like it'd be like talking to a wagon train going west, and the Indians have come and they've surrounded it, but they've circled the wagons. And there's something about circling the wagons; it brings unity. I think our marriages are really under assault today from some of the things that we'll talk about this weekend. But it's causing us to look at our marriages in deeper ways and try to rally the troops, circle the wagons, and pull things in.
So, and one last thing on this topic of just spiritual growth with your spouse. Maybe it's just something that works for you personally. What's a specific habit do you think that's worked between you and your spouse, whether it was praying together or reading together? What's worked for you with your spouse growing together, just one-on-one spiritually?
I would say for Judy and I mean, praying together and reading together is a big help. She does a different Bible reading plan than I do, so we don't necessarily do that reading together. Okay. But we do read some devotional books together that are obviously Bible-based, but will stimulate some additional discussion, sometimes about marriage, sometimes about other things. I mean, there'll be devotional books written about the songs we sing and the meaning behind the songs and the background of the person that wrote the song that provide great discussion. So I think just having spiritual discussions is a big help. I would say Ralph mentioned specifically the idea of me looking at his family because of that time. And that has probably been the biggest difference maker for me when I came to a realization, Ralph will have a chance to talk some about this weekend, that in Ephesians 5, if I understand what the real purpose of marriage is, I get a different focus. And I'm a big believer that God tries to change our mindset or way of thinking in order that he can change our way of acting. And so when he talks about in the transformation in Romans chapter 12, he says that happens by the renewing of your mind. If I'm going to change my life, I have to change the way I think. And so once you come to realization of how critical marriage is, and he mentioned I looked at his family. That was a huge deal to me because the family I grew up in, Ralph had spent about 3 years trying to teach me the gospel that I never responded to. So I was a little thick. I was a little stubborn. I was involved in some sports that I didn't want to give up. I mean, I understand. A lot of it was selfishness. But when I saw their family, eventually I came to a conclusion. Whatever is causing this is what I need. Mm-hmm. And so I think if couples understand that their marriage is much bigger than just them, it is everybody that's seeing them.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's true. Paula and I think probably had more established practices, habits of being together when our girls were home. We have 3 daughters. Mark's got 3 sons, and they're almost spaced in between each other. When the girls were growing up, we had certain things we did with them, but it established 2 things, I think, with our daughters. Number one, my patriarchy of the family. I was in charge of what was happening. But Paula's deep influence on the girls and her ability to speak to them about those spiritual things in that setting. Our family devotions and Bible studies and singings and talking in the car on the way to church. I'm trying to come up with some way of getting a sermon out about what going to church can do for your spirituality. Just practices and habits on your way there can be so enriching and impacting on children. We were focusing on them, but in doing that, I think we were also tying ourselves to each other. So now, well, when COVID came out, we spent some time every day praying for the members of the congregation. And that was really rich, focusing on our responsibilities to others every day. My mother passed away in October, and we spent a lot of time with each other, talking, sharing cards and words that came from other people, and then praying for those people also. So ours, I think, wouldn't be as tightly organized on a calendar as some other people's are. And I say, I don't mind saying that, because I think some people think the only way we can really be spiritual and focus on spirituality is get something on the calendar and it be every day and it become our habit. I do think there's value in that, no question. But sometimes it's things that happen that come up that you turn into a spiritual focus that can make a difference. That makes sense?
It does, and that matches exactly what you were saying, Mark, about realizing it's not just about seeing what marriage really is, bigger than yourself. Yeah. So when that thing comes up, it's an opportunity, like you're saying, serving leads to us growing in ourselves.
And I think that ties in so well with the statements in Deuteronomy, even though it's talking about teaching your children. But it's
when they rise up, when they lie down.
Everywhere you are. And I think it's the same with your spouse. I mean, Judy and I's conversations about spiritual things are not confined to specific times. It just is who your life becomes the more you dedicate yourself to each other and to God, I think.
Absolutely. And like you were saying there before, just having the right mindset. If you are both on track with the spiritual mindset, it's going to drive you. And I like what you pointed out in Romans 12. And he says, so that you may test and approve what is the will of God. I said in my sermon just the other day about thinking and how we can have toxic thinking. And we need to have the will of God, on our minds. And what is, good, well-pleasing, and perfect. And I think if we're thinking on that, then that's going to be definitely helpful, like you're saying. And that Deuteronomy, perfect,
Deuteronomy
right?
6:7. You shall teach them, the children, diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Talking about the law of the Lord.
Yeah, I'm going to hesitate to say this or give a caveat when I say this, but there really aren't a lot of statements in the scriptures about husbands and wives meeting each other's spiritual needs.
That's true.
Like there is this. This statement is clearly an injunction to parents because the children need that. But I think God knows if we'll focus on that, we'll do that together, and it will bring us closer together.
That's interesting, because you get the famous Ephesians 5:25 through 33 about wives submitting husbands loving their wives as Christ loves the church. But like you said, it doesn't mention toward each other in that spiritual growth. And right after that, just chapter 6 talks about fathers teaching and disciplining their children in the instruction of the Lord. Right after that.
And you've got you've got the statements older women are to teach younger women.
Yeah,
but you don't see passages that specifically say, there may be, and it's eluding me right now, but passages that say husbands, spend time with your wives in the Word. Or wives, there's the wives can win their husbands over by their demeanor or their behavior in Peter.
Yeah.
But this idea of focusing on teaching each other and bringing each other closer to the Lord is kind of a given if you'll do the other things you're supposed to be doing.
The lifestyle.
And that's what it says in Deuteronomy, just a couple verses to love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and I think might there, but Jesus says your mind later. Well, you have a passage there.
I was just going to say the only thing I thought of was in Ephesians 5, where he specifically is talking about how the husband is to love the wife, and the specific statement that he makes as being sacrificial, gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water of the word. So that he might present the church to himself in splendor. So somehow or another, my goal as a husband is to do whatever I can to present my wife to God in that spiritual splendor, the way that Christ did the church.
Very insightful. I like that.
That's a good point.
All right. This will probably be shorter than the heavy topic of spirituality. Just a practical tip. Obviously, don't have to get too personal. What's something that's worked for you guys? Maybe, I don't know if it's daily, weekly. There you go, Caleb. Weekly habit when it comes to keeping it fresh and romantic with your wife. How do you beat, the daily drag? How do you guys personally go about that?
I don't know that I'm consistently romantic, but I'm pretty good at being sporadically so. And occasionally it just comes down to, for me, driving past a flower store that I know Paula likes and saying, I haven't bought her flowers in a while. I think I'll stop and get her some flowers. I'm a writer, so I write cards periodically just to tell Paula how much I appreciate her. Giving her a card like that enables her to remember it and use it again and again, as opposed to just making a verbal statement.
Yeah.
But we're all, I think the four of us are real verbal people. Some people aren't. They're not real good at that. And they probably need to work on more tangible ways of expressing themselves. A card. I'm going to tell you, a text is fine if it's, I was just thinking of you, but it probably doesn't need to go much beyond that because they're so transitional.
Sure.
Text and emails, it just seems that probably a little more forethought ought to be put into that. Obviously, remembering birthdays and anniversaries and things of that nature are helpful in keeping us romantically involved with one another. But Paula and I like to just go out to dinner, just the two of us, and just spend time together and talk about how the day went. I think those are important things for us. Has
it changed the older you've gotten with kids, and now are your kids grown up, I imagine?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, in terms of being able to devote more time. When you get kids, you're multi-focused, and now we're an empty nest, and we can focus on each other a little more. But I will also tell you, as we get older and we're starting to be affected by the things of age, and I'm not even talking about physical things, although those are there. I'm talking about loss of parents and relationships that go because of somebody dying, a best friend or a near friend. I haven't lost my best friend yet, but he's across the table. But when you go through those situations, being able to rely on each other is something that you don't think much about when the kids are younger and you're not thinking about end-of-life issues.
I would agree with that, but I would say that you need to think about it because we teach classes on empty nest marriages and that kind of thing. Sorry. Teach classes on empty nest marriages. And we deal with how critically important it is to do something when you're younger, and maybe the kids are home, to keep that romance alive, because there will come a time when the kids are gone, and if they have been absolutely the predominant topic of your discussions and your focus, then you won't have the relationship you need to deal, like Ralph's talking about a little bit later in life. So that special time alone, we try to get couples to understand and get other Christians to understand. You know what? Be a babysitter for somebody. Just volunteer so they can get out, because because that's how we help each other. Parents need time alone when the kids are there, because they will, whether you want them to or not, they will dominate the discussion just because I get to deal with that this weekend in one of the lessons on Sunday, as a matter of fact. They're an assault on marriage like any other assault is on marriage. It's not that they're bad, but it changes the dynamic very much of marriage. So focusing on those things is a big help. Just something that provides the discussion.
That's so true. As Mark said it, if you focus on your kids when the kids are there, and they don't realize that you and your spouse are number one, if they think they're number one, not only is that detrimental in their assessment of how important they are, but it also diminishes how important a marriage is.
Yeah.
And parents that live for their kids and say, I just can't imagine life without the kids. I mean, they're everything to us, are going to wake up one day and the kids won't be there, and they'll look at each other and they'll say, who are you? I don't even know you.
And to keep that fresh in my mind, since we raised 3 sons, I spent much time making sure that my kids understood, you need to understand your mother is the queen of this house and the most important person to me on earth. And I wanted them to know that. As important as they were, I wanted to vocalize that, because I was raising 3 young boys who would become husbands, and I wanted them to have the right concept as well.
And
That's exactly right.
And that, again, like you said, again and again, it's probably going to be a big theme on the weekend. That's understanding the gospel.
Yeah.
What Jesus values the church. And what you're saying, telling your kids how I value my wife.
That's exactly right.
Now, I'm not a big writer as much as Ralph is, but I write short poems occasionally, because Judy likes
Mark writes
poems.
good poems. Yeah.
And so
awesome.
I will make the card instead of buying a store-bought card. I'll make the card, put the artwork on it and stuff, and then the advantage of having the name that I do, the back of the card says "Card made by Hall of Mark" on the back. So, but she gets a big kick out of that. And so every event, like a birthday or an anniversary or whatever, if she gets that homemade card that has a poem in it that she knows I wrote, and that has that little blurb on the back, it keeps those things fresh.
That's so thoughtful.
I think it's cool that the cards all have HEB on the front, because he makes them out of the grocery bags.
Yes, you've got to save money somewhere.
HEB.
That's somewhere.
I do have to tell y'all, one time we did a retreat, and it was my idea, so I can trash this and without hurting anybody's feelings. We said, let's do a marriage retreat where one of us will focus on the first half of marriage and the challenges and difficulties, and the other will focus on the last half of marriage, the empty nest, and what things you encounter in that part. So I said, I'll take the second half. Mark took the first half. Well, his people came out of his session. They were just ebullient. I mean, they were so excited. They had talked about all these great things that you get in the first half of marriage. And yeah, there are challenges with the kids, but it's wonderful. I remember a lady coming out of my session, because I was talking about you start dealing with death issues,
right?
And your own impending death. You think about that, and you may have parents that you have to take care of at the second half. Your children are gone, so you got to learn to live without them. And then there are the issues of children and grandchildren. If they live near you or away from you, how involved to be. Real. I mean, these are serious challenges. One lady came out and said, "Goodness, Ralph, I was almost asking, could I die in the first half of marriage so I don't have to go through what you went through?" So,
man,
I got the bad side of that one. We haven't done that again since then.
That's
we
tough.
Done that one.
It's interesting you bring up talking about you mentioning an empty nest there. Made me think of this, because you had also said the importance of getting babysitters, like in your church and whatnot, that one-on-one time, because that's a weird, relatively new phenomenon in just human history, where it used to be you lived in the same house or in the same neighborhood as your parents and your grandparents, and that all that stability was there. And now it's not. My parents are in California. That's not the very different culture change.
Travel's changed that.
And so
travel.
So your church becomes your family, which is really the way it should be anyway.
And that was Mark's point.
That's a good point. Yeah.
All right, we'll begin to wrap up here. This is broad, but is there anything that you guys try to do daily, weekly, and yearly when it comes to you and your spouse? And that could be anything. For example, one time I was told by someone I try to once a week go on a date with my wife, once every single week. There's a couple of my home congregation. One time they had said they didn't celebrate Valentine's Day. They're like, nah, like you said, Ralph, spontaneous. If you want to get flowers and chocolates, it doesn't have to be February 14th. Everyone's got their own quirks about that. So broad, but perhaps what are some daily or weekly or yearly habits you guys have been involved with your wives?
For ours, mostly it would center around some kind of occasion. I don't know why, but numbers and dates stick with me pretty well. So we still celebrate.
Give me your memory.
We still celebrate. We've been married, 44 years.
Wow.
And so we still celebrate the day I proposed, and which was not the same day I gave her the ring. I didn't have the money to give her the ring on the day I proposed, so I gave her the ring about 2 months later. And so we were, besides the actual day of the marriage, we talk about proposal day and ring day. And so just bringing those things up on a yearly basis is a big help. But normally for us it is trying to get, a weekly date. Something of that sort. I would tell you that couples that I do marriages for, some still do unity candles. That used to be a very big deal, not as big now. But if any couple's ever done a unity candle, we didn't have one in our wedding. But I tell them every year, pull the unity candle back out, light it again, have a unity ceremony, because that's a yearly event. So if you can pick some yearly event, I think that certainly is a big help.
That's a great idea.
That is
Mark.
a good idea.
I don't think I've heard you mention that before.
Oh,
Have you not?
No,
Oh,
how about the unity candle?
Yeah.
I like that. We didn't have one, but
We didn't either.
yeah,
man.
that's good. I'm glad we're here. Thanks for giving us a chance to get to know each other better.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anything that pulls you guys closer. Yeah.
Grateful for that. Yeah, I love to read. I've always loved to read, and I read a lot, and I read a lot about marriage. Partly because I know we're going to be doing a marriage retreat, and I love the marriage retreats. I love being there because of what it does for me when I'm there with other couples, but I also love it because of all the prep time that goes into making those things happen. And so my reading often leads me to become aware again of my responsibility toward Paula. I'll be reading a book and I'll go, you know what? I haven't done that. I need to do that. So again, it's not something necessarily I'll do every year, or every month, but it may be for the next 6 months because of something I've read. I've been pushed or encouraged or compelled to do something more for her than I was doing before. And occasionally, Paula will recognize that and she'll say something along the lines of, "What have you been reading? You're doing something different here."
Or we've got a retreat coming up, don't we?
Yeah. That's right.
All right.
So those are the kinds of things I think my reading leads me to do things for my wife that I probably wouldn't have been spurred to do otherwise.
Which I would say stimulating the thought process is critical, because I don't care who you are, the longer you're married, if you don't work at it, you will grow progressively more comfortable and therefore more lax.
Speaking of lax, more comfortable, your spouse is supposed to be, like your friend, right? Your best friend in a way. And sometimes I find, how do you balance that comfortability, that friendship with respect? Sometimes you can get so comfortable that you put them in the friend zone to the point that you might say something that is offensive or hurtful.
Treating her as one of the boys.
Yeah. But then how do you respect her as if she's, just some car you drive every couple months and you never, get intimate or do anything, engage with her? How do you balance that? Does that make sense?
Yes. I think that's a bigger problem with children than it is with a spouse.
Really?
Interesting.
Becoming a friend to my kids. I told my daughters, and not only told them, but showed them, I'm not your friend. I'm your dad. It's a different relationship. I'm never going to be your peer. I don't try to be. And Paula didn't. I mean, Mark probably struggled a little more with that as a father-son, becoming a friend to sons. It's not as easy to become a friend to daughters if you're a man.
Yeah.
But balancing casualness, which we want, with respect and authority structures, which we want, is, I think, harder to do with children than it is with a wife. I will say this. I don't think we've either ourselves, nor have I heard a lot about I think I became such a friend to my wife that we lost our roles in the marriage. And I do think the closer you become as friends, the more likely you are to be forgiving if you do overstep those things, like say something or treat your wife like a pal or a buddy. Right. I think if you're really close, they'll understand that, and you can work your way through that pretty easily. I don't mean to dismiss what you're asking as insignificant, but I don't think it's as big an issue with spouses as it is with parent children.
That's great.
I don't think based on the friendship. As a matter of fact, we have lessons that are titled things like becoming best friends, because that's a good thing with your spouse to have that kind of relationship. I think just in general, we get less careful and cautious around people we're closest to. So we may say some things that we wouldn't say to somebody else. And so it just is a conscious effort. It isn't a lack of respect. It's just sometimes we let our guards down and maybe say something that we shouldn't say. But like Ralph says, the huge advantage of friendship is that becomes a 30-second process to get past the closer you are, as opposed to it being a very difficult thing.
But George, let me follow up with something. I do think that understanding your roles in the relationship is absolutely critical to success. Who does what and why? Yeah. And sometimes it's going to be, well, I do that because I'm better at it. But in some cases, it's, no, I do that because God gave me that responsibility, whether it's male or female. And understanding those things will make your relationship operate so much more smoothly than just assuming that you'll do it because my dad did it and he was good at that. I may not be good at that at all. My father-in-law was a diesel mechanic for the city of Jacksonville. He worked on big pieces of equipment, and he could do anything with his hands and his mind the way it worked. I mean, I struggle with a Phillips head screwdriver. I'm just not real good with those kinds of things. And bless Paula's heart, she understood that, and she did not make the assumption, well, my dad did that, surely you can do that. But it is understanding whose roles are what that make that work easier.
Yeah, and that sounds like seeing a difference even sometimes between, sometimes culture is biblical, sometimes it's not, obviously. And that's understanding the difference between what's a cultural role and what's more of a biblical role.
Or an experiential role. You know, somebody's dad did all the cooking. Mark's a great cook. He does a lot of cooking. I do a minimal amount of that.
Is that part of the marriage retreat? You chef it up?
No, I absolutely did not chef it up at the marriage retreat.
No, but he does that. But I could understand how if he had a daughter, that she might say, it's my husband's job to do the cooking. That's what my dad did.
Right.
You know, so there are things like that you can have expectations that they're not cultural, they're personal experience. And you have to be careful that you don't assume those because of the experiences you've had in your own life.
Sure.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add, because I think the point about understanding the roles is so critical. And I used to be in sales for several years before I preached full time. And we had to have sales training and sales meetings regularly. And so somebody was regularly refreshing your mind as to what you were supposed to be doing. The fact that we are doing marriage retreats for the last 20 years, it could only, if we're open to it, could only improve our way of thinking as to what our role is, because we're constantly, as Ralph says, reading and refreshing our own minds. You know what? I'm supposed to be doing that as a husband. Well, I would tell you, not only for us preparing it, we've been doing it for 20 years. We've got people who have come to them for maybe 10 years that keep coming back to the retreats. And
slow learners.
Slow learners. But they continually get refreshed. And so I would tell couples, whatever you can do to constantly keep God's role for you and those roles in fresh in your mind will help you fulfill those.
That refreshment's almost like a muscle. You know, it rips and it tears and it builds and it makes you stronger each time.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great.
Well, I don't know about the listeners. I think the biggest thing I'm learning right now, we still got a whole weekend in front of us, is, setting I'm kind of more like time-oriented, setting a date type of thing. But sure, that might help us do it. But the bigger picture I'm seeing here in this conversation very briefly is the born again, the changed person of understanding the bigger picture is the biggest thing I'm learning.
Yeah, I know we're going to say it this weekend. I'm sure we will. But a good marriage is not about marrying the right person. It's about becoming the right person.
Oh,
that's good.
Absolutely.
All right, last question. Do you guys have a favorite verse or passage that relates to marriage? Or is it all just too good and you can't pick one?
You know what? I would say for me, it is Ephesians 5, in that section where he's talking about the husband's responsibility, but in particular, verse 29, where he says, "No one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church." That word cherish is just an incredible word, and the image never leaves my mind. It's the idea of softening by body heat or warmth. So it's almost like the idea, I describe it to people, if you ever see a baby crying, they can tense every muscle and just be rigid and everything go rigid, and as a husband, I would always do the right thing, give him to mom. And so, because Judy could take that same child, hold him in her arms, and the baby, I said, would melt. They just go soft when they're in mom's arms. And that's the picture there. So do I treat my wife to where I am cherishing her? To hold her close, to make her feel close, because that's what I want her to do. Christ does that with us in the church. He cherishes us in the sense of drawing us in and making us feel extremely safe and protected and comfortable in his arms. Do I do that with my wife?
Man, I like that.
It's really good. Go ahead, top it.
No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take two and give you a reason. If it's premaritally, it's Song of Solomon. I don't remember if you were in the class when I taught Song of Solomon.
I don't think I was. I got missed out.
It is an incredible book for understanding what premarital romantic relationships are about. I see it as a 3-person story. And there's the Shulamite, and there's her shepherd boy, and then there's Solomon, who's this jaded king just trying to rack up another girl on his list of wives.
Yeah.
But I love some of the things that are said in Song of Songs about premarital love and romance. But my favorite passage, every time I go back to it, I just find more and more and more is Genesis 1 and 2, where you've got the creation account. And not just the statement, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, she'll be called woman because she's taken out of the man. Not just that, but the whole concept of God making man first, making him aware of his loneliness, his aloneness, and then bringing this woman to him that was created from him with the idea that they will work all their lives to become one again. I mean, it just, every time I get back in that, I'm blown away by the incredible wisdom and the challenges that God has given to us to say, here it is, go for it. See if you can make that happen. Man, I love that.
I always love hearing older, wiser women and men say, I keep going back to a passage and I'm learning still today. I love that, how rich the Bible is.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, I think that's a wrap, George.
I think that is a wrap. Thank you guys for having us on. And if you're listening, remember to always subscribe and comment where you can. Thank you guys.
All right, bye.
Go so.